All right. Let's start with a couple opening things. Well, here's what I would say this. It turns out, the more we continue to go along, that God's design unveiled to us in Scripture is best. Yesterday, I served as an agent of the state of Georgia. Anybody want to guess what that means? What did I do? I did. And at the end, actually, I almost forgot because we were in a rush right after the ceremony to get the pictures and get the people off to the reception. You can imagine that. And it was one of those where I was actually at the reception and I was able to catch up with the wedding party. I'm like, hey, I never signed the wedding license yet. And they're all going, congrats. And I'm like, legally, they're not actually husband and wife yet. They're like, oh, we should get that. So just because you might not realize it, here's how that works in the state of Georgia. When a couple applies for a wedding license, they can get their fee waived if they have an approved, I think it's 8 hours of premarital training or of some approved or accredited entity. Now, we have to do that. I have to file with the state of Georgia. I have to present credentials. We have to sign it and get it notarized, and then they get their fee waived. Why does the state of Georgia care if they do 8 hours of premarital anything? What's your thoughts on that? Why does the state care? Why would they incentivize that? Yep. Because the state has a serious economic incentive for that household to stay stable. And it turns out every bit of social science says if you're connected with some community, especially a faith community, or it could be a counselor with the various skills in something, marriages simply go better. Now, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go. But so let's dive into this topic. It ends up being kind of an interesting thing where church and state overlap in the focus on families. All right. So again, this is just kind of reviewing our topics. I already talked about what we'll be doing for that. They presented in the video, they presented a definition of marriage, right? Basically, I like it. I want to go, well, I might wordsmith it a little bit or do that, but we would go, when we talk about marriage and we kind of go, okay, we're doing a Bible study here. What does the Bible talk about for marriage? It kind of goes, a lifetime covenantal union between one man and one woman undergirded by love, mutuality, and a commitment to living wisely and respectfully with one another and the sole arena for sexuality. Now, if we're going to kind of go from there and kind of go, what are some of the scripture verses that are behind that? Well, we could do a whole bunch. That wouldn't be a wasted time of study by itself. But let's briefly fast forward and just kind of go, all right, Genesis. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. We connect the dots from there. We notice a certain thing. Back in the day, there used to be a phrase that old school clergy would use. They would talk about leave and cleave. Did you ever hear that? Right? And it's the idea that there is a new, societal unit being formed in that marriage, in that union. And then furthermore, it describes them as not being two people joining together in that. It actually describes them as one flesh. Somehow today, it's gotten popular, the idea that, right, the more people bring to the table a sexual experience or something, they come and right, they've got this and they have a better set of skills that they bring to it. That's going to make them more successful in their marital union. What does every study and social science say on that? Do they increase their chances of a successful marriage by having more sexual partners to it? It's diametrically opposed. Because it turns out it's not like about some bag of tricks or skill set. It's actually about the intimacy and the uniqueness of the connection that bonds them together. It's a whole different thing than you find when you kind of pick your show or your magazine or something. It's advertising something that is profoundly unhealthy to especially our young people, but not just young people, let's be honest. When you go through that, all right? And then I could grab another passage, 1 Corinthians 7. Each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise, the wife to her husband. Not the most sexy way of stating it right there, but you go, what do we have there? we kind of have a uniqueness. One man, one woman gathered together, and you kind of go, all right, marital duty. Well, I don't know that's how I would say it, but it kind of brings new perspective to, kind of going, honey, reporting for duty, here you are there. But you would kind of go, there is a focus, an exclusivity in the midst of that, and that is part of God's design. Now, I had said it, we talked about a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about roles of church and state. And we say these two realms, the most fundamental unit of both church and the most fundamental unit of state and society is family, right? That's the basic unit of each. Boiled down to its church is by definition a communal thing. The most fundamental unit of church is mom, dad, and kids. In fact, in the Reformation, you can find many writings from Luther that talks about mom and dad as priest and priestess of their household, right? And there they are. The most fundamental unit of society, family. The society has a very vested interest in families being stable. You would go, why is the government even giving marriage licenses? Why are they even in that business? The answer has always been, because that's how you make a society stable, right? Socially, economically, communally, the state of Georgia cares a lot that households stay together, right? And so that's what we're wrestling with now, is we're kind of going, when families aren't stable, stuff unravels over time in terms of the health and well-being and attachment of children that have grown up in that, right? There is none of us that grew up in a flawless, perfect family, but there are undeniable benefits about the stability of families. All right, let's continue to go on. Here's a couple things that a little more than a decade ago, I was doing master's work, a Master's of Science in Family Life. Actually, Pastor Joel and I both we didn't really overlap, but we both did the same program. And here's just a couple zoom out things that, societally speaking, and now I'm going to give you kind of a 50-year scope, things that produced unintended consequences, right? Follow the train of thought with me, and I think you'll see how some of the dots connect, and you kind of go, oh, that's a piece of how we got to some of our current things. So, birth control, right? The Lutheran Church doesn't have a hard stance on birth control because we do take a stand on things like life issues, but birth control that prevents conception, right? You probably know a large degree of women that have used birth control, and we kind of say we don't take a theological stance on that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but let's kind of look at the arc of this. The FDA approved a birth control pill. Anybody want to guess what year? Some of you were alive and you were part of it. 65, pretty close. They approved the pill in 1960. You would say 1965, that's a fair guess, because by that time, it took only 5 years where there was widespread use of it, all right? However, at that time, different states and different religious groups had various stances on it. At the time, there were laws in many states that say you may not use preventative measures in your sexuality. I'll go, now how did they police that? That's probably a pretty awkward conversation in the midst of all of that, because for all throughout history, couples have given some thought to when they want to procreate in various ways. Right? So now that's coming to a head, and probably religiously, most notably, what religious group has taken the strongest stance against birth control? Roman Catholic Church, right? I remember when we were enrolling our kids in a Catholic school when we moved to Texas, we had 3 kids. We thought of ourselves as a large family, and we said, hey, is there a multi-student discount? And they said, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Don, we're a Catholic school. That doesn't start until 5 kids. I'm like, oh, okay. We're not going to get that multi-student discount, apparently. That's how you go, there's a conversation there. Here's the bottom line on kind of a Lutheran stance. No stance against birth control, but let us not neglect children as a gift of God. would be the way that we put it. Let's never adopt language that kids are an inconvenience or keeping you from having your full actualized self in life. We would go, let's not use that language. It is undeniable in Scripture that children are a blessing, a gift, a heritage, and something rich there. So we could use a whole lot of words to continue to say ultimately that bottom line. So now, play this out over time. The introduction of birth control radically changed the society. Some of you realize this. Now, let me kind of go, here's some of the other things. Now, you go, is it a gift? I bet in a lot of your households, you have counted it a gift. Now, here's what happens with it though. Sex becomes less connected to babies. You now kind of have the option and the discretion. All right? So now something's going to shift in the midst of that. And not only sex is less connected with babies, sex becomes more connected with, well, guess what what goes in that blank? More or less committed relationships. Sex increasingly is connected with less committed relationships. All right, so now you've hit a point where sexuality is no longer, right, and this is the 60s and 70s, where there's a period of time where free love reigns until in the late 70s and 80s we start going, oh, there's other factors at play, most notably a pervasiveness of STDs and things that you had to deal with. That was my childhood. How many seminars as a 1970s, 80s kid did we have on STDs? A lot. Right? Because we're going, oh, there's more involved, right? So now, sex is not reserved for marriage. Now, then we go, well, what is marriage? And the shift becomes, well, who chooses to become marriage if it's no longer kind of that boundary? It becomes more about romantic love. I marry the person who completes me. You can find 100 movies where we kind of go, oh, it's my soulmate, they complete me. Take that kind of thinking back 90 years, right? Go visit some of your parents or grandparents during the Dust Bowl years and kind of go, was your marriage all about romance? And your grandparents look back and you're like, I mean, I guess they're going to say maybe, but that ain't the starting point. Right? It was kind of about a functional partnership. There's a joy, there's a connection, right? They did not love one another. But the whole idea that you had to kind of be head over heels and do this, they would go, that wasn't how language was used during those times. Right? So that's one thing. So now, play that into contemporary conversations, right? Marriage is all about the person who completes me. It's about romantic love, and love is love is love is love is love. Right? And so some of that, these are a little bit of gears that I'll turn a little bit that make bigger effects on how conversations happen over time. Let's take another one. In the 1970s, we introduced a new term in how marriages break up. Right? Does anybody know what kind of divorces started becoming more prominent in the 1970s? No-fault divorces, right? Because before that, society had seen marriages as a legally binding union that you had to have cause for getting out of that union, right? And if you had cause for getting out of that union, you were breaking a societal contract. There had to be someone at fault, right? And so you kind of had to be able to say, here's an affair, here's abuse. This person was at fault, right? So I would kind of go, well, maybe it was a well-meaning conversation with no-fault divorce because the goal was to maximize happy marriages by getting rid of an impediment of people who were stuck in unhappy marriages. And probably notably was kind of going, there were some abused or neglected wives. You kind of go, we don't want to have them stuck there. That would be the most noble way of saying that's one of the things we want. We want to maximize happy marriages. All right? And another goal, some of the legal battles of who's at fault in the dissolution of this marriage, well, those weren't fun conversations. Those were horribly contentious legal battles, and the goal there was to minimize animosity and the battles, right? Can you see those goals? Now, here's the question. If those were the goals, we are now about 50 years down the path of no-fault divorces. Have we, ask the question, have we maximized happy marriages? And have we minimized the breaking up of those, the conflict in breaking up of those marriages? The answer is no. In fact, you know what we have nowadays is young adults that are going, hey, is someone messing with the sound? It's kind of ringing in the room. There we go, thank you. So you would do this, and you would kind of go, we haven't minimized that. And in fact, what we've produced, because it does look so contentious, is young adults are increasingly going, ugh, I don't know about that, right? Marriage rates have gone way down and gotten way older. Now, on one hand, they've gotten older because there's more college options, there's more career options, especially for a young lady now compared to 50, 60 years ago. But underneath it, we've also said, maximize yourself, you do you, right? It's individualism with exclamation points. And sometimes these other people that you would have in your life, they get in the way. And you want to go, oh man, what happens when you bring individualism to your marriage or your spouse? It's a mess. Anytime a husband or a wife is acting like capital M, me, and that's the driving factor in their decisions, well, I don't know. How's that go in your marriages? Does that look like fun and joy and union? No, and you've tasted some of that. All right? Now, in the midst of all of that, what fundamental part of family have I not even mentioned in the midst of either birth control or no-fault divorce? You haven't even mentioned kids one lick. And walk through the halls of any school and you would say, do these things have impact on kids? Oh my goodness, we could tell you stories upon stories. And the line, we tend to credit our kids with a certain altruism. My kids just want me to be happy. Well, kids aren't that altruistic. Kids, they just want you together, right? That's what kids want, because kids are you, plural. That's simply who they are by definition, all right? So there's a couple things that you kind of go, okay, let's come back now to legit Bible study with this after just kind of observing some trends. It's not like pointing fingers or trying to find blames or proposing some sort of public policy there. I'm just connecting the dots with why some of our conversations today sound how they do. All right, Genesis 1. On the back of your study sheet, I'm going to read Genesis 1, 26 to 28. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. It goes on from there. Incidentally, what's the first command, the first imperative verb that shows up in Scripture that God gives to humans? What's the first command he gave to y'all? Be fruitful. You want to kind of go, oh, okay, that's interesting. I never kind of saw that in its primacy, both in chronology, and I would say there's an element of importance there. So here's what God creates life. It's a God thing, and he has dominion over all creation. That's what the image of God does. Now that image is given to you. You are an image bearer. It stands to reason you're responsible for the same things. We participate in creating life. That is a crazy echo of God thing that you are a part of, right? How fascinating is that that's God's design. You participate in creating lives that didn't previously exist, right? And we are custodians of creation. This is what God's image does. Now, let's go on to Ephesians 5, the next verse there. Ephesians 5, verses 21 and 31 to 33. I'm skipping there a little bit. Verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Right? In the wedding that I did yesterday, Christian marriage is way more than two people, right, signing a contract and saying, I agree to work with you, I agree to work with you, let's do this. Right? Every part of Scripture says there is, to use this language, it is a profound mystery. What's the Latin word for mystery? Anybody know? Sacrament. There is something sacramental about the union of husband and wife, right? And by sacramental, we mean a flesh and blood way of sharing the grace of God. So, in the midst of that, here are the foundational commands in Ephesians 5. For husbands, here's your command. It's incidentally, it's not the same in Scripture. For husbands, it is love your wives unconditionally. Now, in society, do we get that? Do we say you're supposed to love unconditionally? I would say we understand that a little bit. Wives, do you know this? Scripture never says love your husbands. It's not in Scripture. However, what does it say? Unconditional respect. We balk at that. We tend to go, whoa, I'll respect him when he's respectable. And I go, well, now let me flip that. Does he only love you when you're lovable? No. And I go, well, that's a steep hill. Both of them would be steep hills. You're pledging something unconditional in the midst of that, all right? And the foundation is mutual submission. Not looking for the person who completes me. If you're looking to another human to complete you, you are going to be repeatedly disappointed, and you will suffocate that person, right? That ain't fair to say you must complete me, all right? So, all right, we got that. There is plenty of there to talk about, even though I could go on. I won't, because y'all need to talk about and chew on it. God bless y'all in your discussions.